Assalamu alaikum. हाँ जी, Dr. Khanani, please go ahead.
So thanks everybody for joining. Assalamu alaikum. We have started a study of this book, A History of Knowledge, compiled by Charles von Doren, one of the most prolific readers of the previous century, 93. Phenomenal knowledge, phenomenal understanding, extraordinary individual. The book has 15 chapters. We completed the first chapter a month ago. Shahid had presented it. The second chapter is about the Greek explosion, which Akbar and I will be presenting. This book is not about history. It's a history of knowledge, how the knowledge developed through different historical periods. When Allama Iqbal delivered his lectures, Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, he assumed a lot. He assumed that his audience at that time understood what he was talking about. He may have prepared the lecture, he may have modified them while giving the lectures. He did not put any footnotes, he did not give any references. And it's very difficult actually to read that book, and not many commentaries have been written on that book. Similarly, Charles von Doren perhaps assumed that his audience who was reading the book was knowledgeable about the history of the time period that he was talking about, because he does not give many historical. He leaves it for the reader to find out or to have a previous knowledge of it. And he also does not provide any footnotes. He does not provide any references. He gives his own understanding. And sometimes it is difficult to separate his understanding, his explanation from what the people that he's talking about were writing or thinking. It's the chapter that we are studying today is from page number 29 to 59. So it's just like 30 and a half pages. But enormous amount of material has been compressed into these 30 pages. And it may not be possible to cover each and everything from this book. Dr. Akbar and I both discussed it, and we decided to divide this chapter to make it easy for both of us. So Akbar Bhai will be presenting the first 13 pages or 13 or 14 pages, which deal with the initial phase in which Greek knowledge developed and focus on science and mathematics. I will start from page number 42, and I will be discussing the Greek contribution to literature, philosophy, and history, as well as government. I've tried to read this book many times, chapter particularly, and I've supplemented it by other books as well, especially the Norton Anthology of World Literature and some books on history. So I tried to fill the gaps for people who are not very familiar with that time period or philosophy and literature of that period. But again, I'm sure that I'm going to fall short. So without further ado, Dr. Akbar, thank you so much for volunteering. And please go ahead with your presentation. You can take as much time as possible.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Khanani. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. So as Dr. Khanani mentioned, this chapter deals with the Greek period, and it covers both development of their understanding of the physical world as well as the ethical philosophy, political philosophy. So it's really compressed, and each topic actually you cannot cover in one sitting. So what I will be giving you is just basic gist of what he is talking about on each topic, because it's just impossible to go into details of everything which he covers. Yes, he does assume a lot of things, that the reader knows a lot of things about the topic he is covering. And I had real difficulty. That's why I requested last time to postpone the meeting, because I had not read this Greek philosophy before, and their basic understanding of the physical universe and how they try to explain the physical universe with philosophy. So the chapter starts basically, I stopped sharing. So you can see my screen, right? So he starts with talking about the knowledge explosions in the history of human race. So he identifies two time periods when there was a great explosion of knowledge and understanding in the human history. The first began in Greece about 6th century BC. And the second one began in Europe during the Renaissance, or what we call Renaissance now, and it's still going on. So these two periods he identifies as the two great explosions of knowledge in human history. The second knowledge explosion that we are experiencing today, in this period, we have made astonishing progress in understanding the material world, the physical, the great progress we have made in physical sciences. But the Greeks actually advanced philosophy, especially ethical philosophy, more than we have been able to. So that is the view of the author, that they understood the ethics and the political philosophy probably better than us today. And if we recognize that the current progress in physical sciences, as we will see in the presentation as we move forward, has been partly based on the ideas that the Greeks put forward, then the Greek explosion may actually seem to have been more widely influential than the two knowledge explosions he refers to. So this is an interesting idea, because we think like we have made extraordinary progress, but the influence of this progress on human race, we do not know at this point. So as is the case with any human endeavor, the Greeks made a lot of errors in both understanding of the nature of the universe, nature of the physical world, as well as the human nature. And some of these errors have real disastrous consequences for the human race. And likely, most probably, our knowledge has also made mistakes, and some of which may have disastrous consequences for the human race. And in both cases, the errors we have made in our understanding are usually due to arrogance. So the Greeks had a special name he mentions for arrogance called hubris. And they considered arrogance, hubris, a sin. And they had a god named Nemesis, which would punish the people who were arrogant. But in our period, we do not worship a god like that, but still we make, I guess, enough errors in our understanding of things. So with that, I will start with like how this period began. So until around 10th century BC, Greek was not even a written language. So the Greeks started to colonize some of the areas and islands around the Greek peninsula, and they colonized the Western Anatolia, which is currently the western part of Turkey. And they established an empire which we now refer to as Ionia. And the most prosperous city in that empire was Miletus. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. Miletus. So Miletus is actually by sea very close to Egypt. So around 800 BC, Greeks started trading with the Egyptians, and they started exchanging ideas, started a trade of goods and ideas. And from the Egyptians, they learned how to make scrolls from the papyrus tree, which Greeks had discovered probably a long time ago. And this material then can be used for writing. And this was very durable, very smooth material. and that can be used to write. And so that's how the Greeks started writing during that period around 800 BC. And this spread throughout the Greek speaking world, the writing and the sharing of ideas, as well as the keeping of the records. And during that period, around 600 BC, a person named Thales was born in Miletus, Miletus, the city which I mentioned earlier. And he was really a learned person. He has been described as the first philosopher, the first scientist, and he is basically recognized for breaking from the use of mythology to explain the world and the physical universe, and instead explaining natural objects and phenomena by rational hypotheses. So this, some people refer to as this is precursor to the modern science. And he was the first thinker to propose a single universal principle of the material universe. And he refers to it as a unique substance that itself unchanging underlay all change. So his basic question was basically, oops, what happened? Why it's not moving? Does everything change in the universe, in the world, or is there something that does not? Basically, what underlies all change over all times in all places of the universe. So if we look at the universe, so he explains, the author explains in some detail that there is all the time change going on. In animals, in plants, in sea, in mountains, everything changes over time. So what Thales was asking, is there something that does not change, that underlay all this change we see? And he proposed that, yes, there is such a thing as the enduring universe or cosmos as its underlying principle, and that which undergoes change is water. So there's a famous saying, his saying, all is water. So people assume a lot of things from this. I think Arthur just mentioned that it does not really mean like he meant everything is made up of water, but at least he was trying to understand the changing universe from a rational perspective. So he did not resort to explaining the natural phenomena or natural change through mythology or religious beliefs. He basically used rational thinking to understand. So that is an extraordinary assumption if you think about that in the human history, that the world is an intelligible entity whose workings can be understood and explained in terms of one or more underlying elements. So we now maybe look back and think like, so he was just trying to explain things very simply, but this was the beginning of, when humans started to explain the external universe, the material universe by rational hypotheses, rather than mythology or religion or beliefs or whatever, supernatural assumptions people had at that time. And we still do actually some, we explain a lot of things through our religious beliefs as well, other phenomena, other assumptions, I would say. So he proposed that in addition to that, underlay all material things is something that does not change, and he referred to it as water. But he did not include in his hypothesis the human mind. He did not, it's unclear at this point, like, did he consider the human mind as immaterial or some material? But it is like Arthur believes that he did not believe that the mind was a material thing. But he did believe that there may be some comparability between the external world. So he uses I think this is a philosophical term. That's like, I had a hard time understanding these, some of the very typical philosophical terms, commensurability between the external world and the human mind. So this, he does not give a definitive answer, like if he believed what was the nature of the mind, but it is understood that at least he proposed some kind of connection between the external world and the human mind. So I will just briefly go over this invention of mathematics. Pythagoras is still very famous because he is the one who developed some of the theorems about mathematics. And I will just go over one critical idea that he came up with. And he was the first to realize that there may be a connection between things and numbers. So the author refers to this legend that he was sitting one day with his musical instrument with strangers, and he realized that there is some relationship between the sound of the instrument and the ratios between the the strings. And this was really astonishing to him, that there could be some relationship between the music, the sound, that comes out, and some numbers or ratios between them. So he thought like this strange relationship between things might have an even greater influence on material things. So soon he and his disciples arrived at the conclusion that things are numbers and numbers are things. So basically they try to explain everything, the physical universe, in the mathematical terms. Is everything okay? I hear some sounds. Hello?
You're fine.
Oh, okay. I was hearing some sounds.
Yeah, somebody else's mic.
Okay. So that's how he and his students basically arrived at this conclusion that things are numbers and numbers are things. So this is how this intimate connection between mathematics and the material world was discovered. And this basically original thought inside that there is something about the real world that can be understood in mathematical terms. And according to the Pythagoreans, basically, only in the mathematical terms is one of the great advances in human history and human thought. And he refers to the few ideas that have been ever been more fruitful than this. But they soon ran into, I'm not going into the history of what kind of people these were. He goes into a little bit detail that these were really arrogant people, and wherever they lived, they caused some trouble to people around them. But they were mostly rational people, and they tried to explain things in the mathematical term. And they soon ran into this problem that not all things can be described with rational numbers, what we call the integer numbers, but there are things that their relationship with mathematics comes out to be as some irrational numbers. And this thought was very puzzling to them. They did not understand because they were thinking like the universe can be understood with reason. And why, if the universe is reasonable and can be understood with reason, why there are irrational numbers, and why is there a possibility that there are things which are irrational in this universe? But they basically tackle this issue head on, and they try to understand it, but eventually they got into trouble with the authorities and this group of people who were, originally advanced this idea of connection between material things and the universe. They kind of, gone away slowly, and some of the knowledge got lost, and author refers to this phenomenon that at some instances, some of the knowledge and some of the progress gets stopped due to political reasons or some other reasons. So this might have happened, that the progress in mathematics could not be continued as it could have been. And now I move to the discovery of the atomic theory. So again, this topic is so wide-ranging, and so much progress has been made over centuries since the Greek ideas about the atomic theory by Democritus. That is just mind-boggling, and as we know about the atom and the composition of the matter now so much, and a lot of this goes back to actually Democritus. So he was born in Greece, I believe around 480 or 470 BC. And his father was a very rich person. So this is really important to kind of understand where this person was coming from. So his father was rich, and he inherited. So when his father passed away, his belongings were divided into three parts: the land, the buildings, and the money. So the money was the smallest part, but Democritus chose money because he wanted to be free and he wanted to travel. So he took all his inheritance and he traveled. He traveled to Egypt, he traveled to Persia, he traveled to India and learned different things, mathematics, philosophy, anything he could learn. And then he went back to Greece and then started, writing books. So it is believed that he wrote about 70 books on a range of subjects. So the guy was really well traveled and well learned. And he traveled all the known world as far as, except probably China at that time. So his writings cover so diverse topics, from ethics to mathematics, and some even believe that the original theorem, some of the theorems were discovered by him, from physics to music, literature, medicine, history, all the subjects he covered. And he is the first one who tried to explain the material universe and proposed this hypothesis that every material thing is made up of finite number of discrete particles. And he named these as atoms. So that's where this word actually comes from, this is the Greek word. And he proposed that actually these are the atoms, and joining together and separation of these atoms account for the changes we observe, the coming to be of things and their passing away. So this is all because of the atoms. And then he also goes into some of the properties of the atoms. The atoms themselves are infinite in number and are eternal, but there is a finite number of different kind of atoms. So the atoms are, in terms of total numbers, are infinite, but the kind of atoms, there is a finite number. So they have different shapes, different sizes, like water is round and smooth, so it can move. And then the others have hooks and, like iron, the solid things. So different shapes and sizes of atoms. And all the atoms move according to a necessary motion in void. So this idea of atom, matter, and void, so that's this comes from originally from Democritus. And he describes that the atoms are the principle of being of anything, and the void is the principle of non-being. And because he is proposing that the atoms are infinite, but if we assume that the universe is finite and there are infinite number of atoms, then it will be filled with the atoms. No matter how small the atoms are, the universe will get filled. So he actually proposed, and he was aware of this. So contrary to the beliefs at that time, he actually proposed that there are infinite universes. So there are infinite number of universes containing many different words, at least one of which, and perhaps more than one, is an exact copy of our own, with persons in it just like you and me. So this is again a very interesting idea to suggest that because this even a lot of the later thinkers believed in this idea. Even Friedrich Nietzsche believed in this idea of infinite universes, where there may be exact copies or replicas of our universe and copies of us as well somewhere in the universe. So he tried to explain his hypothesis, his theory in a very rational way. But there is definitely a kind of tension between the idea that everything is made up of atoms, but when we perceive things in the universe, there are some things which like smell, like taste, which you cannot like wrap your head around, that there may be atoms behind these kind of senses we have. So there is this tension between the senses and the intellectual speculations that all things are made up of atoms, but our mind is experiencing some really sensations. Our sensations have these experiences of the smell, the taste, and others things which cannot be described in terms, at least at that time, in terms of the atom. So he refers to one dialogue that has been preserved from Democritus, where the intellect and senses seem to have opposing views of things. So if we look at like what he was proposing in terms of the modern knowledge, actually some of the things he proposed have been confirmed by modern science. And it's actually, if you think about it, some of the things he was proposing, if we consider those in terms of the modern science, there are some similarities, but there are more differences. So we understand things more deeply now about the atoms and the particles than the Greeks could ever have. But there are some basic understandings of things. I would say that there is some resemblance. There is definitely no clear overlap of things, but there is, at least if you just read the description, you feel like, oh, they sound similar, but they are not the same. So the idea that atoms were invisibly small and indivisible, it's to some extent true, but not the indivisible part. And the other two ideas he put forward, that atoms were in perpetual motion, and the continued motion of atoms was inherent, and this follows the law of inertia. So this whole idea that the atoms may be following the law of inertia was totally unacceptable to later philosophers, especially Aristotle. He did not believe that except the celestial bodies, which he believed were divinely moving through some divine force, there's like anything else that can move on its own. But some of these aspects have been confirmed by modern science. So this is amazing that the Greeks had these ideas more than 2 millennia ago, and they were at least partly right about things. But again, he also tried to explain some other aspects of reality And he held the view that soul is a breath. And the author mentioned that all the ancient words about soul basically refers to breath. And because breath is material and therefore made up of atoms, so must the soul be. So that was the Democritus view, that soul is also material. But can we accept that the soul or the mind is material? So this is very interesting thought, but if it is a physical thing like stones or water, it must be determined by physical laws. It cannot be free. So some of these, the language I'm trying to keep a little bit closer to what authors describes in, because I think this is important, because I don't want to bring in some discrepancy between what authors mentions and what I try to explain. But how can we say that the soul or the mind or the will is not free? We are more certain of our freedom than anything else. So he explains this, the freedom we have about do anything we want to. And we are really certain about that as human species. So we can accept the assumption that Democritus had, that our bodies, at least, maybe even breath, are part of the material universe, which we can understand by assuming it is made up of atoms and the void. But we cannot accept that our minds, our souls and wills are material. So again, this he goes into a little bit of discussion on this topic, that the notion that soul was material was so unacceptable to the Greeks and the later thinkers, Greek thinkers, especially students of Aristotle and the Christians, that for nearly 2 millennia, the atomic hypothesis languished, and the advancement in physical sciences was basically halted to some extent. And the question is why some ideas and he mentioned this fact that none of the books Democritus wrote have survived. And there was this historical, I don't know if this is a fact or this is like understood, that Plato wanted to burn all of Democritus' books. And we will go over this a little bit more in the next couple of slides. And so because some of his ideas were so outside the, I would say, the normal understanding or normal acceptance of the population or the intellectual people or the thinkers at that time, so somehow they became, some of that knowledge or his speculations got lost. So they did not receive as much attraction or traction as some of the other ideas later thinkers had. So this is the authors asked this question, like why some ideas are picked up and propagated, and why some of the other ideas are kind of languish for a long time before some people realize their importance. So this happened to Democritus, that most of his work was lost, or all of his work has been lost actually, and whatever we have is based on what other people said, like Plato or Aristotle or later thinkers said about Democritus' work. So we do not have any actual books of Democritus that survived to this day. So now going back to this, like why Plato was so much against Democritus' ideas. So his teacher, who was Socrates, he was actually only interested in ethics and politics. So he was not interested in the matter or the physical, sciences or understanding the matter. And Plato basically inherited this kind of prejudice towards matter and the systematic study of the material world. So he actually had kind of what's the word he used? So the Plato had basically some. I'm struggling with the word he uses.
Idea.
Bias.
Idea.
Bias, yes,
Bias.
not bias basically, and against the matter, and he inherited that from Socrates, and he basically added to this bias is a form of contempt. That's the word I was looking. Sorry, a form of contempt for the matter. So he just believed that matter is not really important. So this is Plato's thinking, and it's also based on his teacher Socrates. So he was more interested in what underlay matter, and he believed that what underlay matter was immaterial, not material. So that he called the form. So the author uses this, the capital F and capital M for the forms and matter. But these are, if we think about it in today's terminology, like these are just kind of ideas or essences, non-physical essences or ideas, what he termed as forms of all things, like tables, cats, men, as well as things that we call good, true. So even the attributes, what we call attributes, beautiful. These are forms. So that's what what is the most important thing about things. It's not the matter, and what is shared by all the things that we call cats. It's catness, said Plato, a form. Catness is not material, even although all cats are material beings. So what is shared by all things that are good, by virtue of which we call them good, it's goodness. Another, and this is a higher form, he termed it, is immaterial. So although there may be many good things that are material. So he was trying to explain things in terms of their essences, their forms, not in terms of matter. So matter, he thought, does not matter. Basically, it's the form that matters. And that's how we understand things, from forms, not from matter. So from a philosophical point of view, this was a sophisticated solution to the problem posed by Thales. So Thales was asking what word is made up of, how the change happens. So Plato was explaining that it's the form that matters, not the matter, which is important. But from a scientific point of view, if you think about it, it's just useless. So Aristotle, who was Plato's student, he recognized the lack of balance in Plato's solution to Thales' problem. And then he basically explained existence of things through the composition of matter and form. So it's very interesting to, if you pay attention to how this thinking evolved from Thales to Aristotle. So just imagine, how far Greeks went within a century or 2 centuries, from the very basic ideas of, from going from mythology all the way to really explaining things in a highly rational, sophisticated, logical way, and trying to, comprehend the reality. So this, the Aristotelian model, author refers to as the ultimate solution to the Thales problem. So what Aristotle thought about the matter. So he says matter is pure potentiality. It's nothing yet, but it has the capacity to be anything. Form is what matter becomes when it becomes something. But matter and form are necessary for the existence of anything. Both matter and form are necessary for the existence of anything. So he tried to correct what Plato basically kind of ignored totally, the role of matter in the universe we perceive, and try to come up with this solution where matter is just a potentiality. It is nothing. It can become anything. So when both matter and form have to come together, so both are necessary for the existence of anything. And so matter and form, they do not exist on their own. They must come together to make any real thing exist. So here, author mentions this Aristotle's view that in case of living beings, especially humans, like a cat or human, the mother contributed the matter and the father the form. So this was, I think Dr. Khanani will go over this in more detail, was the basis of the thinking that the females are inferior to males because they only contributed matter, and the form, as I have been mentioning, Plato and even Aristotle thought the form is the more important, or the critical part of the material universe is not the matter. But still, he at least had some appreciation compared to his teacher Plato. So Aristotle viewed the world as full of real objects, or he refers to them as substances having a potential aspect, right? So these objects, substances could become anything, which allows them to change, right? So they have this potential to change, and they have this formal or essential aspect, which is non-physical, which makes them intelligible and allow us to understand them. So what we understand, it is the form that we understand, not the thing themselves, since forms can be in our minds as well as things, whereas the things themselves are not in our minds. And he also a little bit differed from Plato in terms of the existence of form in the absence of matter. So Plato had suggested that forms can exist on their own without matter. But Aristotle believed that form and matter has to come together for anything to exist. Forms cannot exist on their own. In our mind, we need to have an idea, and then they need to have that thing, but you can term as maybe imitation or whatever, but there has to be a thing for us to have that form in our mind. Otherwise, we cannot understand the thing, right? Because there is no form. Although we can have the dreams about things which we have not seen, but they, according to Aristotle, they cannot exist on their own. So it's basically we understand things in the terms of forms, not in the terms of matter. So it's our senses, what our senses perceive. And then again, this tension between, as I mentioned, what our intellect comes up with or speculates and what our senses sense, right? Because our senses basically sense the matter and its properties, right? Its qualities. The form is in our mind. So it's this tension is kind of, has been very interesting part of our, understanding of the universe or the outer world. So from the philosophical point of view, it is the ultimate solution, as author mentions, and he claims that no one has improved upon it. So I'm not really, I cannot really comment on this statement because I don't know about it much. But from the scientific point of view, the concept of matter as pure potentiality and as such having no real existence is problematic, right? Means how can you say that the matter cannot exist on its own? It is just a potentiality. So, and I will stop here. And I think this is, as you can imagine, like, so broad a topic, and there are so many different things. I just try to cover very basic ideas of these few Greek thinkers from 600 BC all the way to the Aristotle's time, and then Dr. Saleem Khanani will cover the ethics and politics part and the history part of this chapter. Thank you so much for listening, and I will be happy to or try to answer any questions. As I mentioned, this was the first time I read on this topic, and I think I was overwhelmed, and I'm amazed, and I kind of developed some interest, and I would say maybe more than I can read or understand. So I do have interest in this topic, especially the atomism and the evolution of this hypothesis over time. I try to read about it and find it very fascinating as a chemist, especially. And I remember I read this discussion of this atomism in Iqbal's book, and I didn't understand anything.
Dr. Khanani, are you ready?
Jazakallah khairan, Dr. Akbar. I know this is a very, very difficult chapter. A lot of knowledge has been compressed, and it requires a lot of knowledge of chemistry, mathematics, and science to understand first, and then explaining it is even more difficult. So just thanks so much for doing it, and we will hear from you more in future once you have enhanced your own knowledge. Just a few things that I want to talk about before beginning my own presentation here is the statement of Thales, all is water. It has a Desi equivalent, sab maya hai. Maya is liquid as well. And the meaning of the phrase sab maya is that everything is illusory, but it can also mean everything is water. The second thing is the asset allocation by Democritus' father. I think it's kind of fascinating that he kept his wealth in three portions. One was, you can say, stock and bonds in the current terminology. The second one was real estate. And the third one was cash. So for those who are about to retire or are planning for retirement, have a lot of cash on hand as well. And don't put all your eggs in one basket. The third part is, as you mentioned, that every word in Greek for soul has to do with breath. The same is true for Arabic, that the two words used in the Quran, nafas and ruh, both have this connotation of breath or air. And I have an actually complete book, Ruh Kya Hai. It's from Lahore, published from Lahore. It's a series of articles written by both Western and Pakistani scholars on the concept of what is Ruh. And there's a lot to be said about the Ruh as opposed to the matter. The body is matter, and Ruh is something different from it, but something attached to it during life. And this is also part of the atomic theory of the body, that the body has a dimorphic structure, matter and soul. So now let's start with the second part. Part 2 has to deal mostly with philosophy, literature, and history. Now, who were the Greeks? And the Greeks are also known as Hellas and later on as Hellenes. Helen of Troy is the mythical character around which a 10-year-old battle was fought. We'll talk about it more. And Hellenization is like we say Islamization. Hellenization was an idea of Alexander the Great, convert the entire world into a Greek tributary and to Grecicize everything, to Hellenize everything. The origin of the word Greek remains a mystery. This is not mentioned in Von Doren's book, so I've taken it from other sources as well, that the language which these people spoke belongs to the Indo-European family. But many ancient words and place names have terminations that are definitely not Indo-European. And one example given is thalassa. Thalassa means sea. And there is a disease called thalassemia, which actually originated around the Mediterranean Sea. It's a blood disorder. The conclusion given in the Norton Anthology of World Literature is that Greeks are presumably blend of native tribes and Indo-European invaders. This is how the Turks also would do. They will invade the neighboring tribes. The Mongols will invade the neighboring tribes. And eventually there was an intermingling of nations, and new languages came into origin, just like Urdu came into origin after the Turks came to India, and then Islam came up to the front as well. Now, the beginning of the Greek civilization goes back to 3,000 years before the current era. And it coincides with the Bronze Age, and it's also known as the Aegean civilization. I will show you a map. It's on the island of Crete and other Aegean islands. So the Crete is a word that comes quite frequently when we read about the Greek history. This civilization flourished from around 3000 BC to around 1450 BC. It gradually declined and ended around 1100 BC. So the decline of a civilization follows a particular pattern of a slow and gradual decline, and then it accelerates. Now, this Minoan civilization is named after a mythical king Minos. Nobody knows if he ever existed, but it is mentioned in some of the literary works. The civilization was rediscovered in the 20th century through the work of British archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans. They had a particular writing system. Von Doren mentions it as linear A. Another book mentions it as linear B, and I don't know much about it. It's considered to be the earliest civilization of its kind in Europe, and it was destroyed either by a volcanic eruption or outside invasion. And again, we have no sure way of knowing. Now, this is a map of the Aegean Sea, which is a part of the Mediterranean Sea. So Mediterranean Sea is right in here. This is the Sea of Crete towards the south. As you move upwards, north and east, we have Athens. Sparta is here, and these two were the rival cities. They also made a coalition. This is the Aegean Sea, which separates Greece from Turkey, and further north is Macedonia, from where Alexander the Great came. And Persian Empire had actually controlled all of this area, and they wanted to invade the Greece as well. We'll discuss it further. Okay, now after the glorious Minoan civilization, the Greek entered a period of dark ages that lasted for several centuries. Now, if you look at it, Europe was in the dark ages for a long time. The Muslim civilization has also entered a dark age, not completely dark, but it's still dark age. And that period lasted for centuries after the collapse of the Minoan civilization till the beginning of the Archaic age. So there are different ages of the Greek world: Minoan civilization or the Minoan age, Archaic age, and then the classical period. The book, Von Doren's book, basically talks about the classical period. Now, Greeks were illiterate and no written evidence is available for this period. It's like vanished from history. But during this period, oral tradition of poetry developed as illustrated by Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. These are two very famous poems. We'll talk briefly about them. The next phase is the Archaic Greece, which is when the Greek woke up. The dark age disappeared, they came to the front. And this starts from the 8th century BC to the second Persian invasion of Greece in 480 BC. The Persian Empire invaded Greece first in 490, and then 10 years later. And each time, the bigger army was defeated by a smaller army. That, like the Quran says, that how many times it has happened that a smaller army has defeated a big army. So this period was then followed by the classical period. Now, what actually happened, if you imagine that Pakistan and India forget their hostilities for the next 50 or 100 years, the money that is going towards prevention of war could be diverted to other pursuits. Same thing happens that when the Persian threat was over, the Greeks entered a period where they were not fighting against an external enemy. But unfortunately, that was a short period. In the Archaic period, Greeks settled across the Mediterranean and the Black Seas as far as the Marsial in the west and Trebizond in the east. And by its end, the Greeks were part of a trade network spanning the entire Mediterranean. So I'm showing you a map of the ancient Greek now. So you can see the Athens is here right at the tip. It's jutting into the Mediterranean Sea. And the Sparta is here. And Will Durant has written a book about the history of philosophy, and it gives you a visual impression that this is like a hand. If you look at it, hand, the fingers and the thumb are jutting into the Mediterranean Sea. So Sparta is here, very close to Athens. Crete is further down here. Ionia is here, where Thales came from. And Macedonia is here, where Alexander the Great eventually conquers the Greece. And this is Asia Minor, where Turkey was. And Ephesus is a part which is considered to be the place where the cave of the Ashabul Kahf is there. Again, Allah knows best. Okay, so now the emergence from the Dark Ages. It started with literacy resuming with a different alphabet. So now the Greek had a different alphabet. The civilization was still fragmented. There was no one country, but it was made up of independent city-states which were known as polis. So the word politics actually comes from polis, which is the art of running a state or statecraft. But each of these states, like you can say Shrewsbury, Auburn, Worcester, Westborough, Northborough, they have different customs, different political structure, and even different dialects. These cities were rivals of each other and fierce competitors. And you can understand the reason that the resources were very limited. The sea was there, but everybody wanted to have control of the sea and the trade. The two main centers that developed were in Athens and Sparta. And just like the Indian-Pakistani wars, which could be glorified 500 years from now, the fights between Athens and Sparta became the talk of the poets. The Persian invasions were defended from 490 to 479 BC by a coalition. So the only way of defeating an external enemy is that the internal enemies become friends, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, this is a tale of the two city-states, which were very different. Sparta, from which the English word Spartan comes, it was governed by a ruling elite. It was an oligarchy with a strict military discipline to control the majority underclass. So you can easily see the resemblance between many countries nowadays, that there is a political ruling class or the establishment. The establishment is supported by the military is supported by the ruling elite, and they both control the majority underclass. Now, Attica, of which Athens was the leading city, was a democracy. The word demo means people, cracy means government. So it's a rule of the people by the people. But was it really a rule of the people by the people? The people here were minority. By minority, we mean males and Greeks. Women, even if they are Greeks, slaves, and resident aliens were excluded from the right of citizenship. Slaves were the property of their owners. Women could not own property, hold office, or vote. So the people was actually a caricature. It was a mockery of the main word democracy. It was not a democracy in the strict sense. It was still an oligarchy, but it was called democracy. Now, the victory over the Persians in 490 and 480 boosted the morale of the Greeks, and it started an unprecedented intellectual and cultural movement. It led to the development of new pro-scientific ideas, some of which were mentioned by Akbar. And these were alternatives to the old myths about how the world was made and how it functioned. Now, Shahid Ikram has actually read, probably has read some of it, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which gives us the prevailing view about how the world came into being, who were gods, and how the gods and people were interacting. And similar ideas were there in the Greeks, where they thought that Mount Olympus was the place where the gods lived, and Zeus was the main god, and the gods had wives and children. The wives were also goddesses. They used to fight with each other. Some of the goddesses will come down and marry human beings. They will fall in love with them. And each god had a specific task, or you can say he was a minister with a portfolio, and they will each fight with each other and even kill each other. Now here, in the classical age, the Greeks changed that worldview. They started to study how the body works, including the effect of environment on diet and on health, supporting theory with observation. This is mostly coming from von Doren's book. Now, Herodotus was the first anthropological historian. In Islamic literature, it is Ibn Khaldun, who was not just a historian, he was also an anthropological historian who looked at the effect of customs, cultural differences on the history of that period. So Herodotus analyzed and described the cultural differences among Greeks, Persians, and Egyptians. Shahid Ikram had mentioned last month that the Egyptian people were a people who did not want to change. And their inability to change was actually an important factor in the stability of their empire. Persians, on the other hand, were warriors. They just wanted to expand their empire. They had problems with the Romans, they had problems with the Greeks, they had problems with the Muslims as well. So they kept doing this all the time. On the other hand, Greeks were merchants and intellectuals. Once they had defended themselves against the Persians, they spent most of their money and intellect on intellectual pursuits, on literature, on philosophy, and on building good structures. But then they started to fight with each other. Now, after Herodotus, who is considered to be the father of history, came the Thucydides, and he was the first political historian. So as opposed to Herodotus, who focused on anthropological differences, he faced upon the Thucydides studied the impact of economic and political factors on the causation of war. During the 5th century BC, the great Athenian theater developed with tragedy, comedy, and satire. So their literature started with tragedy. I'll talk about it in a couple of minutes, I think. Then came comedy, and then came the satire. The satire was on the political milieu or the political situation of that time. The poets are the mouthpieces of the community. They have a poetic license. They can criticize the government in different ways, in satirical manner, and try and get away with it. This was an essential outlet for the cultural confusion of the age. The cultural confusion of the age starts with the realization of the people that who should be our ruler? If we are slaves, will we remain slaves forever? Will women continue to be inferior to men forever? Is education the prerogative of the privileged only? Who are we? Do we matter or not? And the masses found an outlet from the dramas which were written and performed on the stage. Now, the birth of philosophy starts with what Dr. Akbar described as the pre-Socratic philosophers. But they are called pre-Socratic, but some of them were even contemporaries of Socrates, but there was a difference in ideology and principles. Only fragments of the writings or teachings of these philosophers have reached us. As Akbar mentioned, the Democritus, 70 books were probably burned. And this happened in Islamic history as well. The books of Mu'tazila, the rationalist, were burned. Books written by Imam Tabri were also burned, and so on and so forth. The Arabs, when they studied the Greek philosophy, they translated, they commented, they adopted it as well. And they used to call at least some of the pre-Socratic philosophers as al-Muwahhidin, or the monotheist. Now, the important pre-Socratic schools were, number one was a Milesian, which includes Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes. Pythagorean, where the Pythagoras is the sole representative. None of his students was actually able to develop it further. Ephesian, the Heraclitus, Electicus, Xenophanes, Parmenides, Zeno, Melissus, and von Doren has actually quoted some interesting things from these scholars as well, which I did not include here. Then the atomist, and before Democritus was Leucippus as well. Now Socrates, we'll talk about Socrates, and one of the most famous quotation from Socrates is that the unexamined life is not worth living. He was born in Athens about 470 BC. He was a soldier, so he participated in the wars against the Persian as well. And he was a sophist. Now, Sophy means wisdom. Philosophy means I love wisdom. And he was a teacher of philosophy, but who did not take money for teaching. There were other sophists as well. He founded the Socratic method of teaching. It's a method which was adopted by Imam Abu Hanifa as well. That he did not just deliver lectures where people are remaining silent and nobody asks a question. Dr. Asrar Ahmad had that kind of methodology that he would give a lecture, nobody can ask a question, and even at the end, he did not usually answer questions. On the other hand, Socrates will go to people who thought that they were educated, and he will pose questions to them. And based upon their answers, he will question them further, and he will drive them nuts. And he had the same method when he was teaching the young people. The youth were basically surrounding him and learning from his methods of teaching, because here they were not just listening to a lecture, they were actually participating. And Imam Abu Hanifa actually did the same thing. And as happens, he made more enemies than friends. Eventually, he was tried for impiety and corrupting the youth. He chose to die by drinking the poison from the hemlock. Now, he himself did not write a book, but his student Plato. By the way, Socrates is known as Socrates, Plato is known as Aflatun, Aristotle is known as Aristu, and Hippocrates is known as Bokrat, or the Desi-speaking people. So Plato actually compiled dialogues. The dia means two, which means Socrates and somebody else, that Socrates was engaging in talking. And it is hard to know how much is actually Socrates speaking and how much is Plato inserting his own ideas. I think Plato may have been able to get around from the authorities by putting his ideas into the mouth of Socrates. So one of the dialogues, there are three major dialogues, but there are others as well, but there are three major dialogues. One of them is apology. Now, apology does not mean apologize that I've done something wrong. Apology in Greek means to defend yourself, to speak in your own defense. So in this dialogue, Plato recounts the trial of Socrates and what he said in his own defense, and he chose to die rather than take back or modify what he has said. Plato was a student of Socrates. He recorded his teacher's teachings in dialogues. He was born in Athens. He left Athens after the execution of Socrates, so he was obviously afraid of his own life. And I think that may be the reason that instead of writing a book and expressing his own ideas as his ideas, he put those words in the mouth of Socrates. But again, we don't know. He learned from Pythagoras as well in Sicily. Sicily was another center of intellect and science and literature in those days. He founded the Academy, which you can call the first college or the first university in Athens in 387. He started a systematic conduct of research in philosophy and mathematics. This is his credit. He also came up with the philosophy of ideas, which Dr. Akbar mentioned. Now, the word idea also means form. When we talk about ideology and ideal, my ideal is something which exists in my mind. Does it really exist in a form? So he said that catness is a quality which applies to all the cats. All cats have catness, all dogs have dogness. But what exactly is catness? It is not material, it's an idea, it's a form which exists in another world, which is the world of ideas. So he similarly said that a good action, when we say something is good, then what is goodness? And it's a goodness, it doesn't have a form. A good act has a form, but goodness is an idea which exists in a different world of ideas. It's too difficult for me to understand. Then came Aristotle, who was born in Stagira, which is in Macedonia. So this is now Macedonia comes into picture because Alexander the Great is from Macedonia, Alexander of Macedonia, and Aristotle was his teacher. So he was born in 384 BC. He went to the academy and studied for 20 years as Plato's student. Imam Abu Hanifa studied under his teacher Hammad for 18 years. And after Hammad had passed away, he was appointed the teacher in his place. And Imam Abu Hanifa was already in his 30s when he became a student. So his official period of learning for Imam Abu Hanifa started way in his late 30s. Now, Aristotle founded a different institution. It was called Lyceum in Athens. And Lyceum actually means a hall for public lectures or discussions. So it was like an open forum. You can say it was now a social media of that time, that you can post anything, you can give a lecture, you can have a discussion on anything. He taught Alexander for 3 years, and he left Athens for Chalcis after Alexander had died by making a very famous statement. It was not fitting for two philosophers to be killed by the Athenians. You know, this is a universal truth. Dr. Abdul Qadir Khan, Dr. Abdul Salam are two other examples where people turned their heroes into villains. And he died in 322 BC. What was Aristotle's contribution? Now, Charles von Doren acknowledges that he has been rather harsh on Aristotle. So he criticizes him a lot. And Allama Iqbal, in his book, the Asrar-e-Khudi, in the very first edition, he criticized Aristotle a lot, which did not go well with some people. So in the second edition of the book Asrar-e-Khudi, he deleted those verses. Now, Aristotle taught us to reason about the world we see and know. So he invented the science of logic. He divided science into different branches. He wrote extensively on logic, ethics, natural science, politics. To him, the most important being in the world was man. So he started to study man in different forms, not just science. And he studied not just the world, but study the man as well. And he introduced the concepts of virtue, justice, and government. Now, virtue is an individual thing. You do something, an act which is good. Justice is between people, and government is how the government controls the people. So justice is between you and me, but the government is the one that decides if you and I fight. And there are certain rules. Now, Aristotle believed, and this is where this concept of Greek superiority comes, that slaves, women, and non-Greeks were inferior. This is downright racist, and Doren makes no hanky-panky about it. Aristotle cautioned Alexander to prohibit his captains from intermarrying with the barbarians. For the non-Greeks who were being colonized by the Greeks were called barbarians. And actually the term barbars was used for the African Muslims. So he may be talking about Muslims as well, because Alexander went to Egypt as well. And so the Von Doren's words are, otherwise the virus of inferiority will infect the superior race. One of the most famous books, and the first book on ethics written, is called Nicomachean Ethics. And it's in 10 volumes. And you can go on YouTube and listen to the lecture on each of the book. Nicomacheus was both the name of the father of Aristotle as well as the son of Aristotle. And it is about virtue and about its reward, which according to Aristotle is happiness. Now, who is a virtuous person? He defined that a virtuous person is one who makes right choices habitually, not sometimes. And so right choices are choices of action and are mean between extremes. So courage is mean between the extremes of timidity and rashness. And right choices are made by the right man. A good man is one who makes the right choice. Now, this is a cause and effect sort of a relationship. If A is equal to B and B is equal to C, then A is equal to C. But we will look at the what is called by Charles Doren as the fallacy of the consequent. Okay. Now, what determines the superiority of some over the others? And who is deserving to be a ruler? The issue of merit. Now, by the way, just yesterday, one of my class fellows, he's a professor of cardiology, Zahid Jamal, and he runs the cardiology fellowship program in Pakistan. And we were discussing the quota system in Sindh. A notification came about the admission to medical colleges, and at the end was that the candidates must have Sindh domicile, which practically excludes Karachi. And he said that I get people from all parts of the world for cardiology fellowship, and there's a limited number of seats. There are Pashtuns, there are Balochis, there are Punjabis, there are Sindhis. The institute is, by the way, National Institute of Cardiovascular Disease in Karachi. So he's interviewing people from all over the country, and he said, what should I do? If I don't accept the people who have the domicile of Karachi, they will not be accepted by the cardiology institutions in any other province. And they say, if I choose a Sindhi or a Karachite by preferring him over somebody who's more qualified, but he's not from Sindh, am I doing something wrong, and how do I deal with it? So we were discussing this issue of merit, and I told him to read some relevant chapters from the Republic. So we'll just talk about it. Again, I'm not being biased against Sindhi, Punjabis, or anybody. Now, Aristotle, Plato, and Confucius, they were contemporary. Actually, Confucius was almost a contemporary of Aristotle. They never met with each other. They never knew about each other. And Confucius' ideas of the superiority of merit and the criteria of merit as the sole criteria for being a leader was discussed by Shahid Ikram last month. So I will not get into that's a very detailed discussion. Charles Doren finds flaws in Aristotle's he calls circulatory of reasoning that has serious consequences until today. So now the fallacy of the consequent, and I'm giving an example not mentioned in this book. So one example is the lamp is broken and the room is dark. Okay. So now from that statement, you can say the room is dark, therefore the lamp is broken. It's not there, therefore the lamp is broken. But is the conclusion correct? Conclusion is not correct. It is fallacious because there can be any reason why the room is dark. The lamp is not necessarily broken. The lamp is switched off. There is no electricity. The bulb in the lamp has been broken. Nobody turned the lamp on. It doesn't necessarily mean that if the room is dark, the lamp has to be broken. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you are a slave, a woman, or a non-Greek, then you are definitely inferior because Greeks are superior. So if you're not a Greek and if you're not a male, you cannot be superior. So that's the fallacy of the consequent. And he said it's a logical error and it works in reverse as well. So non-Greeks, slaves, and women are inferior because they are inferior. That's the reasoning or the logic of Aristotle. And if one is treated as superior because one is superior, in other words, because one is a Greek male, he's superior to non-Greek males and women, and slave men and women, and Greek women. So in other words, what we deserve, what we have is what we deserve. So if you are a ruler, you deserve to be a ruler, and what others do not have, they do not deserve. So Charles Warren kind of tongue-in-cheek remark is justice reigns. Now, Republic is also a very, very influential book in multiple volumes. And I looked through the Spark notes on the Republic, and you can find some lectures on YouTube as well. And basically, the book number 3 is what is the focus of Von Doren's book or the chapter. So the book Republic is Plato's political philosophy. He did not believe in rugged individualism, which you can say that, I don't know what he means by it, but perhaps he means that in a state, you have to be part of a state. Your individualism is good, but your individualism is subservient to communalism. So he said everybody needed to be part of the state and its contributing member. And through a dialogue between Glaucon was one of Plato's 2 brothers, and Socrates. So again, Plato may be inserting his ideas that here Socrates assigned classes, or more accurately, castes to organize citizens. And this is not mentioned in Von Doren's book, but Socrates in that dialogue said that he gave an example or the analogy of metals. He said God has made some people with gold. So gold is the matter of their bodies. They are the rulers. Then God made some people with silver. These are the warriors who will protect the state. And then God made some people with iron, who will serve the state with good services and skills. What it means is that those who are born into the superior class will remain superior. They deserve to be the ruler. Those who are the warriors will beget warriors. And those who are producers, working class people, will beget working class people. And then what happens? So now, in Plato's dialogue about justice, the Republic, he mentioned that rulers only deserve to rule if they have undergone an intensive and far-reaching education so that they become philosophers. So he gave the idea of a philosopher king. It's somewhat similar to Confucius' idea, and the idea that was prevalent until maybe 100 years ago, even in Europe as well, that people who have an education of Greek and Latin, Shaidikram has probably mentioned it last time, the people who have knowledge of Latin and Greek, they deserve to be in the ruling class. They deserve to be the civil servants, because if they can master these 2 languages, they can learn anything. So that the focus was on linguistic. So a philosopher king is a ruler who possesses both a love of wisdom, which is philosophy, as well as intelligence, reliability, and a willingness to live a simple life. If you apply this to the rulers in the current world, nobody is eligible to be a ruler. Such are the rulers of his utopian city. He called the city Callipolis. For such a community to ever come into being, philosophers must become kings, or those now called kings must genuinely and adequately philosophize. So if you have a BA pass in Pakistan who becomes the prime minister, he has to go back to school and learn philosophy. Now, what's the noble lie? Von Doren actually uses the word royal lie. He doesn't use the word noble lie, but this is what I found on the internet in the actual book. So within book 3 of the Republic, the question of how to choose their rulers, this is what I was talking to my friend, that how do you choose your trainees based upon their merit, or you have to consider that if I do not select a Sindhi for an institution which is in Sindh, this poor guy has no chance of finding a job in Punjab or Balochistan or what's the other city, Northwest Frontier. Actually, I will just narrate a little anecdote which happened to one of my friends. He was a Punjabi and he came to Karachi, Dow Medical College, and became a doctor. He then picked up his bag and ended up in Canada and went to a judge and applied for asylum. And he said that I'm a Punjabi and Jamatis are beating up Punjabis in Punjab. I cannot find a job in Sindh because my domicile is not Sindhi, my domicile is Punjabi. So I cannot find a job. He had some paper clippings which talked about these issues, Punjabis, Jamatis beating Punjabis and the domicile qualification and so forth. The judge granted him a Canadian asylum right away. So just to let you know. So the question of how to choose the rulers is brought to the attention of both Socrates and our interlocutor, Glaucon. So Glaucon is talking to Socrates. We don't know if he really talked to him or not. They discuss the best method for this selection and what a good ruler should and should not be. The develops opens the discussion of finding a falsehood. So this is the lie, the noble lie, that can persuade even rulers and possibly create a better city, leading to the usage of the myth of metals that I already mentioned, the noble lie. So what it means. Now, the question is, when Plato mentioned that a ruler should be a philosopher king, the question is, where do you find them? Secondly, how do you produce them? Is there an institution where you can take people, teach them the art of the science of philosophy and political science and language and literature, and then prepare him for leadership? Actually, in civil service of Pakistan, something similar does happen. Now, until such time, mankind must be content. This is the lie. Until such time, mankind must be content with a kind of shadow of justice, characterized by a royal lie, in von Doren's words, or a noble lie, to the effect that those who rule deserve to do so, and those who are ruled deserve that too. This is the Socrates in the dialogue. This is how von Doren mentions. Now, in Confucian, we have meritocracy, based that men are inherently unequal. There are some people who can study the books and understand the books better, and therefore they should rule based upon their merit. Whereas in Socrates, it is aristocracy, and Charles von Doren poses this question that are men inherently unequal? Can they be taught? Now, what is merit through education? How do we provide people who have achieved merit through education? For this, you need equal opportunity for education, which unfortunately we don't have. Superiority is determined through grades and merit. So those who get the higher number in civil service examination get promoted or get higher positions. It was in Pakistan as well when I graduated that the top wards for rotation were the top two fields were medicine and surgery. And in medicine and surgery, we had medical ward 1 through 6, surgical ward 1 through 6. And it was considered to be a prestige to be able to do your house job in medical 1 and surgical 1. And this was solely determined by the grade, your grades, your numbers overall in 5 years. Even though whether you are good to be surgeon or not, didn't matter. Now, merit should not be assumed to be innate. Greater effort as well as greater intelligence is needed. So here there is an interplay of both intelligence and effort. That a person who achieves good grade may not be more intelligent than somebody who had less grade, because the one with lesser intelligence put more effort into it. But is he really more capable of being the ruler just because he has passed an examination with flying colors? That's also a circulatory idea. It is more important to obtain rulers who know how to rule. How they manage to develop this knowledge by effort or intelligence does not matter. So the question could be, should you get somebody to rule the country who knows how to rule, but who is not honest? Or should you choose somebody on the basis of honesty, even though he's totally incompetent? No political connections here. Now, are all men and women equal? This is the irony of the royal lie. Equality should not be used to justify direct democracy. Not all people are equally qualified to rule. The state must propagate the doctrine that all are not equal in order to obtain able rulers. This is what was going on in Greece at that time. And most people would not accept those who ruled over them unless they felt that the rulers were inherently superior. So this was a state propaganda to convince the people that those who are rulers deserve to be the rulers, and those who are not rulers do not deserve to be rulers, and they should accept it. Even though it's a lie, they should accept it as truth. So if everybody accept the royal lie, then does a lie become a truth, or does a lie still remain a lie? This is one of the questions which Doren poses. So the fallacy of the consequent applied to the royal lie: if all people are equal, some are rulers and others are ruled, and that this principle is accepted because the ruled accept the royal lie. So by the fallacy of the consequent, this is to assume that the royal lie is not a lie. In other words, some persons, namely the rulers, really are superiors, else they would not be rulers. This was actually used by the Abbasi Khalifas in a different way. They came up with the idea of the createdness of the Quran, Khalqa Quran. I'm not going into the detail, but what they said was that although we acknowledge that we are not fit to rule because we are not good people, but it's already written in the book of Allah. So why do you have to rise against us? Why should there be any rebellion against us? If we are rulers, it's determined by Allah. If we are not good, but we are still rulers, it's also because of Allah. This is how they came up with that idea. Now, when do we need justice? Aristotle mentioned, this again quoting from Doren, if all men were friends, there would be no need for justice. Since not all men are friends, a government is needed to impose justice upon them if needed. So this is a justification to have a government. Now, Doren tries to analyze it in his own way using this concept of fallacy of the consequent. And he said members of a club do not need rules to govern themselves because they're all friends. They only need rules to keep other people out, the ones that do not belong. What an interesting idea. And he said justice is only needed when dealing with others, usually inferior. Justice helps to keep them in their place. I think it's a fantastic statement that he makes. Now, is Doren being hard on Aristotle? So he himself acknowledges Aristotle's greatness as a philosopher and a proto-scientist, but he mentioned that Aristotle's errors have had enduring harmful effects. He introduced a doctrine of natural inferiority and female inferiority, justified slavery, defended tyranny in the name of benevolent despotism, and his doctrine of ethnic inferiority helped to justify racism. And he talks about the homosexuals and every other people who are kind of being ostracized. He said, the royal lie is with us. Do you vote for a person you believe to be a better person or the one you think is likely to be a better ruler? What about knowledge and experience? Are they not important too? He raises this question. Do we believe with Socrates that all men and women are equal as human beings? But does that mean that all are equally qualified to be leaders? And these are philosophical issues that people more than 2,500 years ago were thinking. We think we are more intelligent than people before us. I challenge you to read one page of a dialogue from Plato, or one page of Aristotle's book on ethics, or one page from Republic, and see how much time it takes to understand that. I'm not trying to brag about it, but these are very tough materials to understand. Now, the Persian Empire, the Persian Greek, if you guys want me to stop at any time, please let me know, I will stop it, but I'll be rushing. So the Greece, the one in Greek green color is where the Persian Empire was extending from India in the east all the way to the west, Lydia, Thrace, but not the Greece. The Athens is here. So Persians, there was no more room to extend here. They wanted to extend to Athens and they wanted to conquer. Why would they want to conquer? Here is the Mediterranean Sea, the trade route. They wanted to control it. So the Persians made several attempts to expand their empire westward into Greece. It was probably the strongest empire at the time, and different kings were Medes, Cyrus the Great, his son Darius or Dara, and then Xerxes. The first war was in 490 between the Persians and the Greek at the Marathon, the Battle of the Marathon, where Greeks led by Miltiades, the word military may have come from it, beat the Persians against all odds, against the numbers. The Persians then waited for 10 more years, regrouping and then assailing again. But this time they were defeated by an alliance of the Spartan land forces and the Athenian navy. So Athens had the naval fleet, where the Spartan had the warriors on foot. This was an inspiration to the Greeks, particularly the Athenians. epic poetry came to glorify the war and the war heroes. It is in Arabic poetry, Persian poetry, Hindu poetry, Mahabharata. Everywhere there is an epic hero, but unfortunately the epic hero who has supernatural power, outstanding courage, eventually dies. So this is heroism versus destiny. Now, Herodotus and Thucydides pioneered history writing to memorialize and try to understand what had actually happened. How could they win? Now, Parthenon, I think I will just quote, this is just a temple which the Greeks rebuilt under Pericles, and the ruins of it still stand. In the early 1460s, the Ottomans turned it into a masjid. We talk about Babri Masjid. The Muslims turned a Greek architecture into a masjid. Now, unfortunately, the alliance between Athens and Sparta and their other allies did not last long. So Peloponnese is a peninsula in Greek. So these two parties started to fight with each other, and eventually both destroyed each other. So the only victor was the war itself. People lost. And there are many different causes, but I will not go into it because Doren doesn't mention it. The consequences was that it marked the end of the golden age of Greece. A change in the style of warfare and the fall of Athens, once the strongest city in Greece. The balance of power shifted. The Athens came under a series of tyrants and then a democracy. It eventually lost its dominance and region to Sparta. And the Spartan rule did not last long. And less than a century later, they were conquered and made part of the kingdom of Macedon under King Philip, who was the father of Alexander the Great. Alexander was a student of Aristotle. He occupied the throne in 336 BC. He set out on a Persian expedition in 334 and eventually conquered Egypt before he died at the age of 32 or so. And Egypt remained under Greek rule for over 300 years until the Roman conquest. The last Greek ruler of Egypt was Cleopatra, Antony and Cleopatra and Julius Caesar, entirely. Now I'll focus on classical Greek literature, but as I mentioned, if it's boring, tell me and I will stop it. So the Iliad and the Odyssey are the earliest work supposedly written by a blind, illiterate singer from the island of Chios named Homer. Nobody really knows if Homer really existed, whether Homer was a man or a woman, whether Homer was multiple people who added on to the poem, these two poems, which were basically oral traditions, and eventually they were written down. They tell the story of two great civilizations and the effect of war on both the winners and the losers. Both are about the Trojan War, which lasted for 10 years, but the Iliad only talks about the last 52 days of this war. It's a mythical conflict between a coalition of the Greeks and the inhabitants of Troy, which is a city in Asia Minor. Asia Minor is where the Turkey is. Now, we don't know if this was a real war or whether this is just an allegory about the war between the Greeks and the Turks. We don't know that. Now, in the book itself, it's mentioned that Paris was a prince of Troy. He abducted Helen. From the Helen comes Hellenization. She was the wife of Menelaus, who was the brother of the king of Sparta, known as Agamemnon. This was a 10-year war which featured two famous heroes, Achilles and Odysseus. Achilles was the muscle, the power. Odysseus was the brain, the mind. The latter built a wooden horse filled with the Greek warriors. Tyrell was referring to it last time. The Trojans, or the people of Troy, were tricked into allowing the horse inside the city. They thought it was a gift. After the nightfall, the soldiers came out. They killed the male inhabitants. They took the women and children as slaves, and they razed the city to the ground. The war ended, but what happened to Achilles and Odysseus is a different story. Now, the drama started in Egypt, and there were dramas or plays which were presented every year in Athens in honor of their god Dionysus. Usually there were religious verse exchanges between a single figure and a chorus representing the people. So that single figure could be a god or a hero. There was no dialogue at that time. And the drama comes from the Greek word dramatos, which means action, deed, play, spectacle. There are three major dramatists who have had a profound influence on world literature. I was listening to one of the lectures on world literature, and it was mentioned that there are three books that have a profound influence on Western literature forever. The first is the Torah, second is the Iliad, and the third is Odysseus. Now, the three major dramatists which are mentioned by von Doren were Aeschylus, who is considered to be the inventor of drama. He introduced a second actor, so now there is a dialogue. And his most famous play is Agamemnon. As I mentioned, the Agamemnon was a mythical, not mythical, but probably a legendary king. Sophocles came later on, and the tragedy was the first form of drama. So he wrote a very famous drama, Oedipus the King. I don't know whether Dr. Munir is here or not. Oedipus complex in psychiatry is based upon this thing, where Oedipus is brought up by a man and a woman who are not his biological parents, but he thinks they are his biological parents. He eventually ends up killing his own father and marrying his own mother. And when he finally finds out, he gouges out his own eyes. And Euripides introduced the elements of comedy. He is considered to be the liveliest, funniest, and most provocative of the three major dramatists of the Athenian classical age. And is one of his most famous plays is Medea. I actually have all of them. I've read some of them, especially Oedipus the King. And maybe as we move along, if people are interested, we can have more book club meetings about some of these dramas like we did with Shakespeare. Now, the actors in those days used to wear a mask. So the same actor could wear different masks and play different characters. And if you go on online, you will find this is the mask, supposedly the mask of Agamemnon. And this is the theater of Dionysus, which had the capacity of about 10,000 people. This is like a stadium. And the stage is in front of you. The people are sitting like they sit in a stadium. The tragedy is derived from the Greek compound words, which means the god song. God jaise sheep hoti hai. And probably it has to do with the sacrificing a god to the king and singing something. And Thespis is traditionally said to have invented tragedy in 534. And the tragedy is basically a hero against the destiny or fate. The hero has supernatural powers, he has extraordinary strength, he's awe-inspiring, he's a high profile, like Macbeth that we read, and yet he meets a tragic end. And why do people fight? And it is mentioned that they knew that they were going to die. There will be no real victory, but they fought for glory, that their name will live forever. And one example is Achilles in the Homer's Iliad, who was killed by an arrow hitting his heel. And the Achilles tendon is now proverbial, it's the major weakness in somebody. It is his Achilles tendon. Now, this is Achilles killing Hector. And actually, there is a really tragic, this is a very tragic scene where after killing Hector, his rival, Achilles actually ties Heracles' dead body to his chariot, and he is dragging it in front of Achilles' wife, infant, children, and his father. Finally, the father comes and begs Achilles, and Achilles starts to cry. He recalled that he also has a father. And what would have happened to his father? What would be his father's feeling if Achilles was killed by Hector? And he basically stops it. He carries his own body up the mountain to give him a proper burial. Now, the spirit of the Greek thought, this is the last part. And it's actually, there are a lot of points over here. Each one can be the topic of a discussion. So the spirit of Greek thought was that they moved from the practical knowledge which earlier people have about hunting and farming to abstract thinking. They learned about cities and men's minds, weapons and warfare, commerce and salesmanship, finance and metals. They introduced systematic learning, not just individual learning, which was not passed on to anybody. And they said that Doren mentioned, anybody who can read can learn and share his learning. They respected the contributions of their predecessors and contemporaries. They criticized what is wrong and adopted what was valuable, and they built upon it. They introduced episteme. The word epistemology is a study of the knowledge, but it's basically an organized knowledge, not haphazard knowledge. They said there is only one truth, but it is not necessary that the entire truth be known at one point in time. The discovery of the truth is an evolution, it's an ongoing process, and bits and pieces of that truth are known to people at different phases in the history. They also introduced pedia, from which the word pedagogy comes, which is curriculum for everybody. So there was a basic syllabus which would be taught in the school, so everybody has some basic knowledge. They also came up with the idea of science by observation and experimentation. And they came with something called iconoclasm, which is to challenge the old beliefs. So I will stop here. There is just too much that I have not covered. There is too much that I have not understood. Now we can open up for discussion for whatever time period we have. We can have more discussion, we can have more time. So I will stop here, and thanks so much for bearing with me, and thank you so much for listening. And Akbar Bhai, thanks so much for discussing the things that I could not have understood very well. I don't have the background.
I think we should go by round one at a time.
Go ahead, Tahir.
And of
Go
course,
ahead.
and of course, we want to also thank and acknowledge your friends that have come from joining from England, like Farhan, Ayub, and others. So they should know the format that anybody can ask a question and they can give their comments. Okay. So Saleem, you want to pick up who's the first one?
Okay, the way I'm looking at it is after me, Dr. Akbar Ali is already mentioned. He can speak at the end. Imtiaz Javed. Imtiaz Bhai, you have anything to add, anything to say, anything to contradict, anything to correct?
I guess we move on.
Okay, Khalid Qazi.
Just as I am correcting this thing, it was amazing. This was one of the best. I really deeply listen everything. First time I heard about the Aristotle and other philosopher, and I also used the this information about 3 days ago. I started looking on the YouTube and other sources to get more information. This one is a really wonderful to listen all these things and not known anything before the history, but it's a great learning and great first time listening all these things. So it's amazing.
Thank you. Now, Tariq Ahmed, Dr. Tariq Ahmed is here. Tariq is my class fellow. We are facing each other after 40 years. So thank you so much, Tariq, for joining. Go ahead, please.
Welcome. Great pleasure seeing you. I just wonder when I listen to all these things, it's like an ocean which has no limit. These topics are so I've known quite a few things which you're discussing, but obviously not in that much detail. And the reason I'm not in detail because at one point I thought there's no end to it. You keep reading, it's fascinating, no doubt. But I wonder, what is the ultimate of this? Who knows? Allah knows.
Thank you, Tariq. Khalid Qazi.
But it was really great. Really enjoyed it, and we'll be waiting for the next one.
Thank you so much, Tariq. If you are interested, now we have this book, History of Knowledge. I will pass it on to you. Maybe you can choose a chapter and give us a presentation at some time. Okay. There are 15 chapters. We are only on the second chapter. Yeah, History of Knowledge by Doren. I will send you the text. I'll text you. Thank you, Tariq. Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you. So same from my side.
Khalid Qazi.
Thank you, Dr. Akbar, and thank you, Dr. Saleem Khanani. Really, it was wonderful listening to both of you. And moreover, as you all said, it's a very huge topic, and you need a lot to even understand. So I think it has opened doors for me, and inshallah, I'll do more on it. Thank you.
Yusuf Bhai.
Mohammed Yusuf, are you there? Or we can come back to him. We can go carry on.
Shahid Ikram.
Thank you. First, thank you, Akbar and Dr. Saab, both of you. It was a wonderful presentation. I enjoyed it. You know, I read this book twice and still want to read it again. By the way, I got that book too. You referred to me, Great Treasure of Western Thought. It is sitting next to my desk. And every time I have a few minutes between running my programs, I open something and read it. It's just wonderful. I recommend everybody. It's 1,400 pages, but it's mind-blowing. Coming back to this, actually, Tariq Bhai, welcome. Farhan, you welcome. First time seeing you. You were saying there's no end to it. And I was reading another book, and I want to say, just learning from there, it is about the journey you take. It's not the end goal.
No.
Like any hero, there is all of us going to die someday and go somewhere. But it is just a player of the path, right? Let's look around, enjoy the path, beautiful knowledge. Are we a better person after listening to these guys? Did we enjoy it? Yeah, I did. It's just a beautiful walk in the park.
Yeah.
And let's enjoy it as long as we can. And, thankful to Akbar and Dr. Saleem putting so much time. And I tell you, they would not have done it unless they are enjoying every moment of it. It is, labor of love, basically. And so let's keep on doing it. Now, at the last thing probably, when I read these books and see Greeks and all those people doing those great things at those times, like Dr. Sab mentioned, man, it really depressed me to see back in Pakistan. It is depressing how little rational thought or evolutionary thinking and everything we are missing. It's scary and it is sad at the same time. So having said that, I will, as I said, I really enjoyed it. It was, again, one of the best presentations, and I am very, very thankful for the effort you put in. Thank you very much. And, I will leave it to the next person now.
Thank you, Shahid. Yusuf Bhai, are you there? If not, let's go to Dr. Mushtaq.
Yes. What is it that?
Can you speak loudly? Mushtaq?
Yeah. What is it that in these people or in these societies that people who appear to be just making things up, but then those turned out to be facts and which last for centuries, and the civilizations are built on those. I mean, how does that happen? How does certain things come to certain minds, a few minds, of course? What is it? Is it divine? Is it they are thinking about things all the time? How does this happen? And on the other hand, billions of people just live like animals, eat and drink and then die and disappear.
Well, I cannot give you an answer. Go ahead, Akbar. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. Can I say something and then you can add? So I think what I understood is these are the people who are exposed to different ideas through their effort or through just being present in some place. I would say I'm lucky. I'm in this company where I'm exposed to different ideas, different things. And then if you are thinking and you have the layer, I guess, if you have the resources, you can come up with the synthesis of those ideas and some new ideas, right? I would give the example of Iqbal. Means you guys know like how much he traveled and how much he interacted with different people and how much he learned from different people from different, totally different cultures. He was, so fluent in Persian. He knew German. He knew, all the English philosophy. The Western philosophy. And then he came up, I believe, with the synthesis where he combined the Western ideas and our, Islamic ideas and try to synthesize a new construct. How to explain, how to, make a conceptual framework of what actually Islam stands for. So that's, I think, my take on this. It's this all combination of personal efforts as well as the exposure you get during your life.
Jazakallah. I'll give it I'll try to answer. There is no easy answer. I think there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. But I will quote the Aristotle himself that an unexamined life is not worth living. So out of billions of people, there are very few people who actually start to examine their own life and the life around themselves. They start to look and try to make some sense out of it. And this is probably, I would say, God-given. And the Islamic answer from the Quran will be, وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. Whoever has been given hikmah, and hikmah you can say intellect, understanding, philosophical knowledge, he has been given the best. So on one way we can say that it is up to the individual to examine, to start thinking. And on the other hand, that God chooses some people to be who they are and to develop knowledge. And Allah knows best. As I said, there is no right answer, there is no wrong answer. I don't know if there is any scientific answer. Anybody can jump in, anybody can modify or add anything.
So as you know, I will jump in at this time.
Yeah.
आप लोग डॉक्टर हैं, you know better than me. There is a part in brain called amygdala or something like that, which is like part of our emotions, right?
Yeah.
When we developed that part during evolution for survival, basically fight or flight. The same part, I believe, I mean that's my understanding, the same part become activated when some new ideas come along which are basically challenging to our traditional thinking. So we have a model of the world, of the religion, of the society in our brain, which we developed from our age 2 to 40, 50, right? And when a foreign idea comes in which is going to break your model or modify your model, your same amygdala, I may calling your emotions comes into action, and you close the door and refuse to understand. You basically block it out. The societies which promote fearless thinking and where people don't close their doors to the new ideas become like Greek societies or Roman societies. The societies which are afraid of thinking that any new idea can break down the model you built or model given to you by rulers or your Maulvis or whatever, your thinkers of the country, those societies become dumb societies and eventually they dies out. So that is again my illiterate view, because I am not a doctor, but this is my illiterate view of why it worked. If you look at just what doctors have presented, all these philosophers, they challenge everything what existed before them. Some of them have to take poison or whatever to fighting their idea, but they were allowed to have fearless thinking for long period of time. And you need a society which promotes. And I am saying, in addition to what actually Akbar said and Dr. Saab said, of course, the other than fearless thinking, your exposure to variety of the cultures, thinkings, and all those make a big difference. But at the same time, when you are exposed to those, you can think whatever the model given to me as a kid is the perfect model, and all these are idiots and barbarians, and you refuse to learn from them. That can happen too. But if you are open to that, and these people were open to that, and that's why they were able to think so far. So that's my penny worth. Hopefully, Dr. Mushtaq Sahab will not run away from the next lecture because of me again.
Shah, thank you very much. A very good explanation, honestly. I'm not just saying that. I really believe that what you said is, I think, the basis of where we are and where the other societies are, and so on. Thank you.
Yeah. So it was more than a penny then. Okay, good.
Zakir Bhai, I don't know if Brother Muhammad Yusuf is back or not. If
But
not,
I
Zakir
don't
Bhai.
think
I just wanted to thank you guys. I think it was good today. I got, without really reading, I got a good gist of that chapter. So once again, thanks.
Well, Zakir Bhai, you're not getting off the hook. You will be presenting one chapter, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Farhan Ayub, are you Waqar Ayub's son?
I think he may be using his computer.
Hello?
I'm 14 and I'm from the UK, and it was very nice to be able to see this. I've read Thucydides and Herodotus already too, some of it.
This Farhan is
That's
Waqar's
amazing.
son, is it?
Yeah, Farhan is
All right.
Waqar's son.
All right.
Farhan, is your father there?
Pardon?
Is your father present? Is he listening?
I can get him on the phone if that would help.
Well, we just wanted to see if he was present and he wanted to say something.
He wasn't listening to this.
Oh,
It was
okay.
just me.
Now, okay, so thank you so much for joining, Farhan, and I'll be sending you the link to our next book club meeting as well. And if you want to suggest a book or if you want to present something, feel free. We all want to learn from you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to watch.
Thank you so much. Did we leave out anybody? I think Zakir, Zahid
No,
Hussain
I'm trying
left.
to see if Yusuf Muhammad Yusuf is back. Is he back?
Yusuf Bhai?
He's mute, you know.
No, he's mute, but he's is he
was
back? I don't
asking.
know. He can unmute himself, but I don't know if he's there.
Well,
He
finally
has-
you have,
I think he has tricked us.
Maybe
He has
left.
walked away and left the thingy on.
Yeah, I will.
Okay, so stop
do-
chasing him. Do something else now.
okay,
Okay.
Tair Ali, you have 3 minutes.
Okay, we are listening to Mushtaq, so I better start counting Mushtaq. First of all, as usual, Dr. Saleem Khanani and also Dr. Akbar, very well done, good presentation, and I'm speaking to the choir when I say that, obviously. And of course, thank you for the people from London to listen to this also. So otherwise, at least the problems of Thales that Akbar already mentioned, and especially the fact that we had talked about Pythagoras. And now in Pythagoras, where it says numbers is, there's a relation between things and numbers, and he came up with all those theories and all that. I remember him when we used to read the Pythagoras theorem, where in a right angle triangle, the hypotenuse square is equal to the sum is equal to the square of the other two sides of the triangle. So that actually was used a lot in other academic areas and mathematics, and it still is a basis, forms the basis of that. So we learned a lot from that. And the other thing that when you talked about Democritus, and he had actually mentioned that in his atomic theory that the smallest particle is an atom and it's indivisible. Of course, at that time it was true. Now, of course, the smallest atom is smallest part of the is not atom anymore. Of course, it has been divided further on, the nucleus and proteins and all. But it's good that at that point you had that much knowledge. And then you talked about Socrates and Plato, Aristotle. Now the thing that Dr. Khanani also mentioned, that he had the Aristotle, the circularity of reasoning, mentioned the flaws that the philosopher had, and the dire consequences of that, which is very important. Now, the other portion that Dr. Khanani had mentioned, the philosopher and king concept, the two things. Now, if you looked at it in those times, the kings used to like to be accompanied by philosophers like Aristotle or Herman, or because they wanted to have some wisdom with them. If they were not wise enough, they would also rely on them. And as soon as and when you go down the history, the Arabs, when they were they used to have Sufis with them or religious scholars with them, or because they always wanted that balance to go along with them. And when you went to the Christians, you see they had like the priest or popes with them, all the same. Religious figures were always went side to side. Of course, in our side, we had we didn't have much civilian rules, but even if we did have in Pakistan, for example, I remember that Zulfikar Ali Bhutto had a Maulana with him also. You know, they went together and they also had exchanged ideas. So it helps the ruler to talk to the whole group. Now, the funny thing that which was mentioned was about Aristotle, that he used to he was against he was for slavery, for racism, had no respect for women, and had a gender issue with the gender bender. He sounded like a Republican to me. So why do people fight? That was a question that you had asked. Hacker, now you mentioned the story of Hacker, and I think one of the reasons people fight and they become heroes when they die, especially in the Muslim Islam, when they die, they are looking for shahadat. And that is what they're looking for. So their motivation to fight is either way They come as Nazis, they come as heroes. If they die, they go to prayer. So I think that is a concept that we had. So I think that's where I'll stop.
Okay, so
Anybody
thank you
else?
so much, Tahir Ali. Now we have the next chapter of the book about the Romans. So after the Greeks comes the Romans. So what the Romans knew, and it's a long chapter from 60 to 85, so 26 pages. Do we have a volunteer for it? We need someone. Otherwise, I will assign it to somebody.
Go ahead, Dr. Saab, assign it.
Okay, Tahir Ali.
Not right now.
I think you sent a message and you said that Yusuf Bhai will do that. I don't know.
No, Yusuf Bhai will take the fifth. He has taken the fifth chapter.
Okay.
So which
How
chapter?
about Tariq Saab नए आए हैं, इनको काबू करें.
नहीं, तारिक साहब नए तो आए हैं, लेकिन तारिक साहब की नॉलेज इस चीज के बारे में अभी मेरा ख्याल है यहाँ जितने लोग बैठे हैं, they are all more knowledgeable and more well read than I am. So I really afraid if I can do a nice presentation.
We will not judge you, I promise you. We will
No,
not.
it's not judging. The other thing is I haven't even read this book yet.
Yeah.
Not even any part of it. So this will be probably not a good idea.
So, Tahir bhai.
Yeah, I will probably take it, but I think we do not judge anybody in this, except for Shahid Ikram. But everybody else, but we are all learning here. And that's the whole deal. The book club is where you learn, read and learn. And we are only trying to project the part of what the thing. For example, a lot of things come up, like for the when we heard about Achilles' heel. I mean Achilles' heel. That is a weakness. That's the only place where if you hit him in Achilles, if you hit him in the heel, that's where he would die. Otherwise, you can keep on killing him. And so we know the weaknesses of the person, and therefore the Achilles' heel became a proverb. That's his weakness. So I think we learn a lot. And I think I look at the Romans. I think Dr. Khanani, if you send me the chapter, and if I can look at it, and I'll probably see if I can do a thing on
That's
it.
great.
Do you have the book, Tahir?
No, I don't.
Well, you will have to get the book.
No, that's the part. Yeah.
Well, I got the used copy for $6 or $7.
This must be available on Amazon or somewhere else.
Yes, Amazon.
It is.
So, Tahir, see if you can get a copy. Otherwise, one of us will give you our copy and you can read it. Khalid Qazi has a copy. So we'll be doing it on the second Saturday of February.
Okay, inshallah.
Is it second or third Saturday?
I think third.
It's third Saturday. Let's take a look at the date. So the 20th, yeah. The 13th was a holiday weekend. So February 20th.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good time.
Yeah.
He will have good enough time there.
Good.
You said, I'm going to stop recording now, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
So if there is nothing else, then we'll adjourn.
Dr. Saab, thank you again. Akbar, thank you very much. I know it's a great effort and it's a lot of effort there, mental and physical. Greatly appreciated all the things you put in.
Really, all of them.